My name is Juliana Nykolaiszyn with the Oklahoma State University Library. Also joining me as an interviewer today is Tanya Finchum. Today is Wednesday, May 27th, 2009, and we're in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, interviewing Vernon Askew and his sons, Alan and Andy. Mr. Askew is owner of the Isaac Favor Farm. This interview is being conducted as part of the Oklahoma Centennial Farm Families Oral History Project. Thank you for joining me today. Well, let's begin by learning how your family came to own the farm.
My wife's family originally settled there in the land run of 1889. However, her great-great-grandfather picked out the land, the original 160 acres. When we were married in 1955, the first place that she took me, well, actually it was before we were married, more like the first date, that I came over from Stillwater to visit her. She took me out to the original homestead to meet her grandmother, who was still living at that time on the farm. When my wife's mother and father passed away, she got the 110 acres, the additional part that had been added. My brother-in-law got the 210 acres, which included the original homestead. The Isaac, as you mentioned, was the original homesteader, and her brother-in-law, who inherited that 210 acres, was killed in Texas by a gyrocopter crash that he had made. His widow was in dire straits. I made her an offer to buy the 210 acres. Come to find out, she did not own the full 210. There are two widows. One lives in New Orleans. She's a widow of Dick Favor, and another that has 1/8 interest in the 210 acres. The other widow lives in Tulsa, and she is the widow of Bill Favor. And it was not an investment that I expected to reap any great monetary reward for, but it was an investment that my children could say, my great-great-great-grandfather homesteaded this place. There's not too many people around that can do that nowadays. So that's how I came to have it.
And do you recall where Mr. Favor came from originally?
I'm sorry?
Where Mr. Favor came from originally?
I believe Isaac Favor came from New Hampshire. Originally, you mean real originally, England. Excuse me. I have a genealogy book. Would you want to turn off your recorder over there, and I'll get it and let you see it?
Well, we could do that after the interview if you like.
Okay, but it is full of stuff.
Okay.
Now, the way they tell the story was when Isaac got there, someone else was already on the land because he was a little bit late, and he traded him his milk cow and his shotgun.
And 2 sacks of feed.
Was that 2 sacks of feed?
Yeah. And he left his son, which would be our great-great-grandfather. He wasn't very old. He's 14 or 15. On the homestead to take care of it. Told the people that had homesteaded next door that he was going to leave him there. And then he rode into Guthrie to officially make the claim.
Well, do you recall the original structures that were on the land during Mr. Favor's time?
It was, originally, I think it was a dugout they had
Mm-hmm.
in the very beginning, and then they built a log cabin somewhere after that.
And it burnt down. And then the farmhouse that we knew burnt down in February from the grass fires that we were having that particular time. I would like to ask Alan, on 110 acres, do you remember any stories about the ownership thereof and the visitors?
Yeah, it was owned by Clarence Simmons, and
This is the quarter section
right,
that's
this
just
is not the original
of the
homestead. It's what we own now. It's what my grandfather bought. And there was a man named Clarence Simmons that lived there. And the story goes, he did a little cattle rustling and was in with some bank robbers and in with the Daltons. So the story goes that whenever the Daltons were there, they'd raise a flag and everybody knew to stay away. But if you go to all the history books, say that the Daltons never were around that area, but then that kind of coincides with why that was their hideout, because they never, you know, they never pulled any bank robberies or anything like that. Now, back in the early 70s, his granddaughter was going to write a book about his history, and I don't know that she ever did it. I've tried to Google Clarence Simmons' name and never came up with any thing on that, but on the documentation we have, he had several aliases. I think he had 4 or 5 different aliases on the land deed when they bought the land. My grandfather bought the land from him. But that's the famous story.
Now what Lush showed me, I know you've seen it too, is where supposedly they had their dugout, and there was something there. There was a dugout or some kind of structure. You can see it's like a double dugout in the shape of a W, where the walls would be. And what he told me also was that they had the Daltons had built a bridge, small bridge over the stream that ran real close to it. And when I was probably 7 or 8 years old, Alan and our grandfather were cutting firewood. The level of the lake was real low, and Liz showed me where the stones were, and they were. It looked like the foundation for a little bridge, right close to where the dugout was supposed to have been. So, I think Liz's account of that's pretty accurate.
Well, that's just fascinating.
And it's in between Guthrie and Kingfisher, sort of. And that's, from what I've read, that's kind of where they were a lot of the time. And so it would make a whole lot of sense that they would have some place somewhere around there to get away.
Well, tell me about other features of the land that you remember growing up.
Well, the home place has a decent-sized pond on it, and I believe he had that dam built. Is that right?
Probably in the 50s.
The home place? Mm-hmm. No, it was built earlier than that. The East place, that dam was built in the 50s. I know because when my wife and I got married, was out at the farm with Lewis, and he mentioned the fact that the big lake didn't have any fish in it because he had just built this dam a couple of years before. So shortly thereafter, he gathered up all of the milk cans in Crescent that he could find, loaded them in a pickup, and we went up to a little town north of Crescent, which was called Marshall, and there was a relative of Lewis Favors that was going to fill in his lake. And I was a city kid from Oklahoma City, and I had never really been around farms or lakes. But anyway, I got to go in the farm pond and take a seine with me to seine fish so that we could transfer them over to the 110 acres lake. That's how we got, the state has a hatchery, but as most state laws do, they didn't plan it very well, the legislature, because if you got your fish from the state hatchery, fish hatchery, you had to let anybody and everybody on that land to fish, because originally they were state-owned fish. So we were not in the mood to do so that's why we seined the fish to put in that lake. And that was in the early 50s. The one on the, what we call the home place, 160 acres, was done in the late teens or early 20s. And they were both dams was built by the agriculture department. I don't
It was the Army Corps of Engineers that Lewis had. They were wanting to establish more ponds in the area.
Well, all over the country.
Right.
Shortly after the land run, yeah.
Well, they were wanting to establish more, so they would come out and do it for you, but they wanted to do it their way.
Yeah.
And Lewis didn't quite agree with the way they wanted to do it, but went ahead and had them build the dams the way they wanted. And then I know on the east place that was originally the Simmons, he had a guy come in later with a dozer and change the path of the spillway because he knew it wouldn't last. They didn't put it over rock, is what he told me, and so he had it moved to where it was over rock, and it's been there for however long it's been there now, perfectly fine. You want to tell him about the house on the home place? I know Lewis.
You tell it.
I don't know when. Do you know when he moved it?
No.
Well, our great grandmother wanted to live out at the farm, and so I don't know when, but he did it with mules. They had cut the house in two and moved it on wagons with mules for her to live in out there on the farm. I think he got a lot of grief about that. Couldn't do that. It wasn't something that would work, but he made it work.
Well, his father-in-law was a contractor, and he told him that once he cut that house in two, he'd never get it back together. And he said when they slid it up next to each other, it just went back perfectly.
Yeah. And it was there for a really long time until the brush fires we had about 6 months or so ago.
Yeah, in February.
Burned it down.
The spillway on the original Homestead has washed out over the years, and I haven't seen it in several months. Have you seen it?
Well, it's about to wash out. It hadn't completely.
Yeah. But about 6 years ago, I contacted the agriculture department in Guthrie, Oklahoma. And the fellow that I had talked to, I have his name, but I don't have it in my mind. But he came out, and I showed him the spillway and how bad shape it was in. And I had talked to a couple of contractors, and they were talking like $20,000, $25,000. Well, the government was not really interested in repairing the spillway. What he wanted to do and what he talked about was cutting cedar trees. They want to cut cedar trees, and that's their main interest today. I understood that I would have to pay 50% of whatever it cost for them to cut the cedar trees and repair the spillway. And when you said 50%, I wanted to know 50% of what?
I remember one story that Orpha told me about. I think it was Lissa's father, Alan, that they nicknamed Judge Favor because he wore the.
I think that was his grandfather.
Was it his grandfather? They had nicknamed Judge Favor. He wasn't a judge because of the kind of hat that he wore. He wore it was a black top hat, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. And he was, the story that I was told, he was a bit of a politician, but he really, it was kind of a hobby. And he'd go hang out in Guthrie just to kind of, it was his hobby. And I remember a story, a little bit of a dispute between Simmons and Favor about there's some problems with some cattle or goats or something, wasn't there? I remember Liz telling me a story about, for a little while there was a little bit of bad blood between the two families because some cattle or other livestock were getting across the fence and they had a little bit of an argument about it and that kind of thing going on.
Now, our great-grandfather, he was county commissioner at the time they built the courthouse in Guthrie, so his name is on the outside of the courthouse.
Well, back on the farm during the old days, what crops and livestock were around?
We weren't around, so we don't know.
Well, they did raise wheat, and of course they raised a garden, and they farmed with mules.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't the greatest ground to grow wheat on, so that didn't last too long. But I know my grandfather was kind of left there to work the farm because his dad was county commissioner, so he was gone, all over the county doing his job. So I know there for several years when he was a kid, he was running the farm and going to school.
And at some point they've had a mortgage on the home place. And what I remember Liz saying is that he had paid it off while going to school, working at the grocery store in Crescent. He had paid off that mortgage. Well, putting himself through school.
But I mean, but they probably had pigs too. They, and just like everybody did back then, they all the neighbors, they all worked together. So if they butchered a calf, everybody got some of the meat, and the next time they'd take turns. And same way with hogs and chickens, and they'd all get together when they scalded hogs and made soap. And, but back then they all worked together.
Louis Faber, their grandfather, my wife's father, always had a garden someplace. I had an office in Oklahoma City, my accounting office, and there was 2 acres of land. It came with my office, and it was about 4,000 square feet. He came down in the summertime and had a garden, vegetable garden, out behind my office. And that was his way of doing things. He liked to be active, but he liked for it to pay off. And I know my wife and I got quite a few vegetables out of that garden. Not that we asked for them, but that he gave them to us. And so that is a basic type of character that all of the Favors that I have known my wife and I were married 49 years and 11 months. And I had met most of the Favors by then, and they were hardworking individuals, and they took care of their families, and that was a trait that was displayed. So Isaac Favor may not have picked out a favorable farmland to build his future on, which was very short. But look at the ancestors that he left in this world to grow up. He was a very successful person.
Now the garden that they had originally, is that where it is now?
It may have been.
Yeah.
It would make sense to me.
But the log cabin set back towards the creek, back behind where the corral used to be, from what Liz told me.
Yeah, yeah. Now once they built a house, is that the one where, was it Bill that was playing with matches?
I think it was Dick.
Was it Dick playing with matches as a kid and burned the place
Actually,
down?
I think that was the log cabin that he burned down.
Was it? Okay. Yeah, so I had a little episode with that.
Was there a barn on the old homestead?
We built a barn. We built a barn in the 70s out there that also burnt down. But as far as I can remember, there wasn't ever a barn. There was another structure there, and of course there was a chicken coop and an outhouse. But I don't ever remember them have built a big barn.
Any stories from the time when they received electricity for the first time?
Well, there's a story from, was it Ray?
Mm-hmm.
That, you go ahead.
Well, it was the Rays, which was my grandmother's maiden name, and they just lived a couple of miles north of where my grandfather lived. And the story goes they were the first to have electricity in the county out there, and of course it was 12-volt electricity, and they had a little wind generator out there so they could run a few lights and run the radio. But they charge batteries kind of like the way the solar panels do now.
If you look at your map, that I furnished you with the Favor Farm was just south of there in, it says Max Ray Trustees. So that was where their grandmother was raised. And then up on the Favor Farm, that was where their grandfather was raised. But you'll notice in this interview, you've never heard the word other than I said grandmother and grandfather. My children never called their grandparents grandma or grandpa. They called them by their first name, Lewis and Orpha. And that was encouraged by their grandparents to be called by their first name by their grandchildren. So that gives you another indication of how great the Favor families were.
Well, my grandmother, she didn't want to be called grandmother because she didn't think she was old. If you were called grandma, that means you were old. And she didn't think she was old. But whenever they'd get together and talk about all those other old people, what those old people were doing, well, those people were the same age they were, but they didn't consider themselves old.
The schoolhouse. Now, did Lewis, that one that's still standing, did he go to school there, or did he just teach
No,
there?
the one where they went to school is about a mile
Lovell.
from where. No, they walked to a school. Both Lewis and Orpha did, and it's about a mile down from where Orpha lived, a mile east. Now, there's not a schoolhouse there anymore, but that's where they went to school, and they also taught school there. Both of them taught school in one-room schoolhouses. We can show you that where it's at, but there's nothing there anymore.
Now, I think Lewis taught at the one that's still standing.
He may have.
There's one that's just a mile or so northeast of the home place.
Miles, yeah.
That it's still standing. It's stone and I think that's where he taught, at least for a little while.
Now, one story my grandfather does tell about the Depression. He said that they didn't really realize there was depression going on because everybody around them was in the same situation, and so they just thought that's the way life was. They didn't really, they heard there was a depression, but they just thought that was the way of life.
Now, were Lewis and Orpha able to make a living on the farm, or did they have to supplement their income by teaching? And
Yeah, in their adult years, they always were school teachers. They never did actually farm other than run cattle out there.
And then later on, Lewis opened or bought the Chevrolet dealership that was in Crescent, and ran that for a little while to put his kids through college. And he worked for him for a little while after you and Mom got married. And he sold that, and when Mom and Dad moved to Oklahoma City, Lewis and Orpha moved up here too. And Orpha taught in Putman City Schools. And Lewis was a teacher and a principal, and he was director of transportation for Putman City Schools for a little while.
Ellen, would you like to tell them who your third grade teacher was?
Evidently, I don't know who it was.
What? I think he's saying it was Orpha. Do you remember that? Did she ever teach a class?
I don't believe she was my third grade teacher.
Well,
You might be thinking about Annette or.
he was, his third grade teacher was his grandmother.
I know that
We'll go back and check the documentation.
I know that Orpha.
She taught in the same grade school that I went to.
Yeah.
She was a teacher there.
When I went there, everybody still knew her, and they lived right behind where the school was, and so I couldn't much get away with anything. Listen, Orpha wouldn't hear about it, and that was real bad. I didn't want them to No, I was anything but an angel.
Well, we lived in Windsor Hills Addition, and the grade school was about 2 blocks from our house. So when they sold their Chevrolet dealership, they moved to Oklahoma City, and Orpha was teaching at that Windsor Hills school. And our oldest daughter, Annette, got mad at her mother one day, I can remember, and ran away to grandmother's house, which was about maybe 4 blocks from where we lived.
I think we all did that at one time or another.
Well, I didn't know about you, but
Yeah, I was mad at you, not Mom.
It's okay. But our family and their family, we raised our family to be respectful and courteous to their elders. They forgot that mostly when I came. You know, I can do no right anymore at my age. But
We've just traded places.
You know, talking about the home place being not the greatest farmland, but you know, they got by, and it had water on it, which was really important, and not all the homesteads out there did. So I think that was something that was really important for them.
Do you recall spending any holidays on the farm?
Oh yeah. Well, my birthday is July 6th. And so as a kid, I always remembered we'd go up to the farm on July 4th. Well, they'd have my birthday there at the same time. And I probably would have told you for a little while that it was all about me. But yeah, I remember going up there just so many times with Lewis and Orpha and fishing with Lewis. And
Well, they were school teachers, so the 3 months in the summer,
Yeah.
we basically lived out there.
I remember sitting on the porch of the house, snapping green beans with my grandmother. And you wouldn't think that a little 7 or 8-year-old boy would enjoy doing that, but if I was doing it with my grandmother, it was all right. And I remember it used to be a lot bigger when I was a little kid. We'd go for a walk around the home place pond or something, and you know, you might as well have been 1,000 miles away from any place. Your imagination as a little kid really gets going.
Would Orpha can?
A little bit, yeah. What I remember about the canning is that Liz would grow green beans in the garden, and Orpha would can them, and then get those out for Thanksgiving or Christmas. And there was something so much better about them. And she put a little bacon in them and that kind of thing. I remember that. I remember going out and staying in the house out at the home place with them and sleeping in the living room on the couch. And I would have been, 5 or 7 years old, somewhere around there. And you could hear the mice running up inside the walls of the house. And that was, 35 years ago.
Did it have indoor plumbing at that time?
Yeah, they had indoor plumbing, and that stove was a gas stove? Yeah, it was a gas stove.
It was electric.
Was it electric?
And they probably got indoor plumbing probably in the very early 70s. Before that, there was an outhouse.
Is it still standing?
No.
Well, as little boys, what else do you remember about doing for fun when you would go out to the old home place? Causing trouble?
Well,
We never caused any trouble, but we had tree houses and, you know.
yeah.
They both would move out to the farm. The one problem that they both have about doing that is their wives would not move with them.
Well, depends on how you look at that.
So
Oh, I'll tell a little story on myself. One time, I was probably 7, and I was on the Home Place Pond. We had a flat bottom john boat out there, and I was by myself and I was fishing. And I had for some reason, I had a little string of black cat firecrackers in my BB gun. And I'd fish for a little while, get bored with that. I'd pop a firecracker, get bored with that. I'd shoot the BB gun for a minute, get bored with that, and go back to fishing. And did this over and over for a little while. You know, it's heaven for a 7-year-old boy. And I had laid the little punk that I was using to light the firecrackers down on the seat of the boat, and it rolled over to the string of black cats. Well, when they went off, I went out and into the lake, and then crawled back in. And when I got back up to the house, Orpha, I'm dripping wet, Orpha asked me, well, what happened? And I don't remember what I told her, but I'm pretty sure I told her a fib, but I knew that she knew. He fell in the lake, it doesn't matter, he's up here at the house, he's still alive, everything's okay. He fell in a few times as a little kid, had to get plucked out. But, you know, I guess the strongest memory I have is my grandfather always out there fishing. He loved to go fishing in that pond. And I mean, he loved to do that.
Well, Vernon, tell me how you met your wife.
how I met my wife, I had been in Korea during the Korean War. I got a free trip to Japan, and I was in the Army, a master sergeant at the age of 20. And
That's because he lied about his age to get into the National Guard.
yeah, I did.
Because they paid you.
Let's just get it all out there.
You got to tell the whole story.
This is one troublesome I didn't anticipate. But anyway, I came home from Korea. My mother lived on a farm up by Hunter, Oklahoma, which is close to Enid. I was not married. I didn't have a job. I had sent all my money home to my mother, and she bought cattle. Well, when I came home, you just don't go out and sell cattle. You got to wait until the market's good. So basically, I didn't have any money. And I discovered that the government would pay for an education to a service person at that time. It was all tuition and books and $100 a month. So the closest college to where my mother lived was Stillwater, Oklahoma Agricultural and Mechanical College. So I decided to go to school there. The $100 in those days did not go very far far as dates are concerned. But I joined a fraternity, and right across the street was a sorority house. And I noticed this blonde several times, and finally I had a friend in the fraternity house who had a girlfriend in the Delta Zeta house, and he arranged for his girlfriend to be my date on a double date thing, and that's how I met my wife. And we went together, well, she was a year ahead of me. She was 4 years younger, but because I was 20 years old before I started to college. In fact, I was 20, 22. Yeah, because the people that I knew in high school were already halfway through college, and but that's how we met.
And that was Rodine and
Fred. Well, Rodine's and Fred was the other partners in this double dating thing. Unfortunately, he passed away with cancer at age 25, just after he graduated from college.
Now, they introduced you that time, they introduced you another time too.
Because she didn't think too much of you in the beginning?
Yeah, you gotta tell the whole story.
This is a problem with elder children. They get you in a position to
Tell the
embarrass
truth.
you, and they go with it.
You want to tell it, or should I? My version might be better, I don't know.
Well, she can always delete anything,
Well,
so go ahead.
Now, at the time, were you and Mom going steady, or were you just dating, or what was the story?
I don't know.
I'm giving you
The story was he was playing the field, wasn't it?
Well,
And she got mad.
that's what he went to an out-of-town football game with another girl.
Yeah.
And Mom had a friend of hers that was a cheerleader at the time and spotted this and let her know. Well, he was done after that. That was it.
Yeah, well, okay, I remember that now. I don't remember who the girl was, but...
And what happened was Fred and Rodine had a party about a year later. And I think they had a sense that they needed a second shot at things. And so they invited both Mom and Dad to this party without telling the other one that they were going to be there. And he got his second chance. Am I right?
You're telling the story.
And the rest was history.
Hmm?
And the rest was history. You got your second chance, and the rest was history.
Yeah, I guess so. Anyway,
You want to tell them about your first date?
no.
No, there's nothing wrong with that.
We, like I say, I think I repeat myself now, but we were married 49 years and 11 months to the day. And it was,
Well, Dad, tell them about your first date, because that's interesting. They'll want to hear about that.
I don't remember.
When you went to you drove into Crescent, picked her up, drove down to Oklahoma City to the amusement park.
Yeah. So? Well, it was, what's the name of that amusement park? It's still out there. I can't think of the name of it. Oh. She had told me that she was going to Colorado to summer school. And the next day, so we went to this amusement park, and she rode some of the rides. She didn't want to ride them all. But anyway, my automobile at that time was like a 36 Chevrolet, and that was in the 50s. And it was not very speedy. So we had dinner, and then we started up to Crescent. And I think my top speed was like 25, 30 miles an hour. And we drove up to her house, and I walked her to the door and told her good night. Then later I discovered that her father was still up, and her mother too, and it was after midnight. And she didn't even get to change clothes because he got her in the car and started for Colorado that night, right after she walked in the door. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, yeah. And now, didn't you go? You were doing something with the 45th Infantry, weren't you?
Not that I remember.
Okay, I thought you went that summer and did something with them while she was in Colorado.
Sure, you went to summer camp.
I went to the National Guard goes to camp every summer.
And then she came back to school to Stillwater.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I was just.
Yeah. We have a genealogy book. In fact, we have two of them for the favorite name. And especially Isaac got a good article about him. My children are on top of the piano there. My oldest daughter, like I think I said before, died last July of cancer. And
she did a lot of work with her mom.
Yeah.
Looking up the information.
My
A lot of time in the libraries.
Grandmother also actually started it.
Annette was my oldest daughter's name. And one year at the state fair, she entered some of her work that she had done for the genealogy, and she won a medal for that. And I hope you'll enjoy it when we get to sit here in a few minutes.
Well, did your wife enjoy going out to the old home place?
Oh yes. Yeah, she enjoyed it up to a point. She did not want to live there. But yes, it was a privilege that she had in growing up to go out and see her grandmother, who was living on the home place at that time.
And over time, were many of the Favor family born on the home place that you know of? Were any of the Favors born on the home place?
Yes, because you didn't have a hospital. In fact, I think there was 5 boys and 1 girl of my father-in-law's generation that were born on that home place. Yes.
You speak very fondly about your grandparents. Did they pass down any words of wisdom to you through the years that you recall?
I remember one time, both Alan and I were with Liz riding out to the farm. And I was a little kid. And driving down the road, we looked over at our fence and somebody had stolen a whole bunch of the fence posts out of it. Not every other one or anything like that. There were just whole lengths of it that all the fence posts were missing. And I remember Liz telling me, well, I guess they needed them worse than we did. And that's kind of how he looked at things is by the time I knew him, he never really got excited about stuff. He was really, I don't know, just really easygoing.
Well, he'd been through hard times, so he
Yeah.
didn't sweat the little stuff.
Yeah, it was no big deal. And there was always a way, whatever was going on, there was always a way to deal with it.
Their grandparents would take, in some cases, when you were still a kid, little kid, they'd take the 3 older children and go away for 2 weeks. And then when he got older and he went with them, and then take all 4 kids and go to Colorado, wherever.
I spent a lot of time over at Liz and Orpha's house after school because the grade school I went to was right there. And so I'd walk over there and stay there for an hour or 2 after school every day till my mom came by and picked me up. And
I could not have had any better in-laws. I was lucky with my wife, but I've heard of having bad in-laws, wanting to live your life and all that. Well, they never wanted to live our lives, but they wanted to be with us. And so I was very lucky, not only in choosing a wife, I like to say I chose her, and also her mother and father were just real good.
Liz had a way, and we've all, Annette, Angela Allen, and I have all talked about this. He had a way of talking to us. He was a teacher, principal, worked a lot with kids, but then he was also our grandfather. And he had a way of, if you did something wrong, the last person in the world that you wanted to know about it was Liz. And not because you'd get in trouble or anything like that, but because you didn't want to disappoint him. And he just had a way. He could talk to you and tell you how disappointed he was in what you did, and you'd much rather get spanked or something. That was just, to disappoint Liz was really bad. You've got a story about Liz and the bus.
Oh, when he was director of transportation for Putnam City Schools, our bus driver got mad at the kids on the bus. They were making too much noise or something. So anyway, he just pulled over and made everybody get off. Well, that's a big no-no. So he asked me about it, and I just told him what happened. And evidently the bus driver didn't know that one of his grandkids rode that bus. So I don't believe he did that anymore.
Well, there was something about you got in trouble and didn't want Liz to know about it. Oh, okay.
But now the one funny thing about my grandparents was that my grandmother was probably 5 foot tall and my grandfather was probably 6'3". But and my grandmother, she was really fiery, and we'd get ready to go out to Crescent on the weekends, and I would go with him, and she'd, whatever we were going to do, build fence or paint, boy, she'd tell him exactly how he ought to do it, and he'd say, okay, yeah, we'll
yes,
do
dear.
that. And she'd say, and you take Alan into town, and you get him a good lunch, and he'd say, okay, yeah, we'll do that. So we'd leave, and on the way out there, he would say, "Well, do you want to stop and get hot dogs and build a fire and roast hot dogs? Or do you want to go to town?" And he, of course, any kid's going to say, roast hot dogs, build a fire. He said, "Okay, don't you tell your grandma. Just tell her that we went to town if she asked and had a good meal." And so that's just always the way their relationship was. Boy, she'd just tell him how it ought to be done. He'd just agree with her and then go about doing it however he was going to do it in the beginning.
And everything was okay.
Yeah.
And he did the same thing with me with the, where do you want to go eat? Oh yeah, it was always beans and hot dogs by the lake. Yeah.
Well, tell me about the farm today. What's going on the farm?
Well, we use it pretty much recreation, hunt and fish and cut firewood and in the past it's been leased.
The pasture.
The pasture's been leased for cattle. Currently it's not. But it's a getaway from, the job I have is all technology, computers and everything, and I like going out there and just dropping that completely, and the memories that are part of it make it special.
He is self-employed, a computer technician deluxe. What do you do?
Watching after my father.
But we enjoy just being out there.
When I get old, you can do that.
Well, I hate to tell you, but you're there.
And like Dad said, if I know my wife would move out there with me, but it's a matter of economics. If there was a way where we could both, be able to keep our careers and the type of employment that we've got and live out there and afford to, I don't think there would be just a whole lot
Technology's coming.
Yeah. I don't think there'd be a whole lot of question about it. It's just a special place to us.
So where do you see the farm going in the next 100 years?
Well, I won't have a say in where it goes, but maybe for the next 30 or 40 years. Beyond that, who knows? But there's kind of a unwritten rule among everybody that it stays in the family. It won't be sold. It won't be, anything like that. We'll do everything we can to keep it.
Well, if you had some grandchildren,
Mm-hmm.
you could leave it to them. But first, I got to have some grandchildren before you can, and you too.
I didn't see that coming at all.
Oh no, we never expected that.
We never hear that.
My wife and I had 4 children, but we deserved some grandchildren. I'm still waiting.
Well, you've shared lots of great memories of your time on the farm and the old home place. Are there any other memories you'd like to share with us in closing that you could recall?
Excuse me. Well, I think we have lots of memories. I recall one year we always tried to go someplace. Usually when we had 4 children at home, we had a station wagon, so everybody had plenty of room to ride. And there was one year that I had used up, I had worked for Blue Cross, but I had used up my vacation time doing something else. So I was going to summer camp with the National Guard. So my wife and I decided that we would have our vacation in Oklahoma City. We would plan to pretend that our home was a motel, and that every day when I got off from work, we would go out and we would go to the amusement park out east of town. We would go to the shows. We would go, it was during the summertime, so the kids were not in school, and they could sleep as late as they wanted to during the day. But I got the general impression that they enjoyed having vacation in Oklahoma City, because we went places that normally we would not have gone. And that's a good memory for me. But you guys will have to talk for yourself.
Well, I remember, there's just so many. I remember in the summertime going with Liz and Orpha and picking some kind of berry that Orpha would make.
Sand plums.
Was it sand plums? That Orpha would make preserves out of, or jelly. And pecans. I remember going and picking up pecans with them. We had the church that I went to as a little kid. Every once in a while, they would have a group go out to the farm, and Liz and Orpha would kind of host the kids out there, and people would go fishing, and I think they camped out a little bit sometimes, and a lot of time just kind of revolved around being out there with Liz and Orpha. One time when I was going to school at that grade school, I honestly made a mistake about a day that we were going to have off from school, and told my mom that, and she said okay. And Liz was going out to the farm, so I went with him out to the farm. Well, while we're out at the farm, of course, the school calls Mom saying, no, school wasn't closed today. And spent the day out there with him, and when we came back, I guess Mom had called Orpha and talked to her about it. And when I got home, Orpha told me that, your mom wants to talk to you. School wasn't really closed today. But she told me, no, it's okay. You probably learned more from your grandfather today than you would have if you'd gone to school. That's just kind of the way that...
Because we could do no wrong in her eyes.
Yep.
Another memory, we traveled quite a bit when we could afford it. We, my wife and I have been to England, to Paris, to Alaska, to Russia, to Japan, Korea, Hawaii. One of the biggest thrills I had was going through the Panama Canal. And when I was in high school, we studied the Panama Canal to death. And we knew how many pounds of earth had to be moved, and the number of people that had yellow fever and all kinds of real important things. So we left from Fort Lauderdale, went down to the Caribbean, went to a couple of islands, went to Colombia, and then we headed towards the Panama Canal. Panama Canal, it does not go east and west. It goes from north to south. You think that they could have built it, but that wasn't the way that it was built. It was built going from north to south. So I was real thrilled about the Panama Canal. I went up on the top deck. I had a hat, and I would cross from one side to the other so I would not miss anything. And we stopped in the country of Panama. We could not get off the boat. But anyway, I got sunstroke, and I went back to my cabin and laid down, and we had TVs up on the upper deck that we could watch what was happening. So I got to watch, I didn't get to go on shore, but I got to watch it in my air-conditioned room. And to me, that was one of the biggest things that she and I did together, was travel. We couldn't always afford it, but or it wasn't convenient, but like the vacation in Oklahoma City, we enjoyed it.
Having lived through the Depression, one thing that Orpha, our grandmother, always did was she saved everything. To the day that she died, she saved everything. And when we had to move her out of the house that they had to an assisted living center, she had saved soap. She had saved everything. And it was, that's how they got by, was by being very frugal. And, listen, Orpha, they were very simple, but, they did what they needed to do for their families.
I can remember something else. Mr. Favor died a few years before she did, and so she wanted to move out of her house and move to an assisted living area. We found one in Yukon, and her birthday was at 90.
Oh, you're talking about the balloon?
Yeah,
I think she was 92.
92 years old, and we asked her what she wanted to do on her 92nd birthday. I want to take a balloon ride. Well, Andy had been with a friend whose father had a balloon, and I also knew in a breakfast club. And so I made arrangements for him to bring his balloon over. And the first time, the weather wasn't right, so we put it off. The second time, all of the, I won't say all, but a lot of the people who lived in this assisted living area were out going to watch the balloon. And Orpha Favor was going to ride in it. So she was the queen of the day. And Andy went with her for this balloon ride, and we followed along in the car. And she had finally put it down on the ground. It was a little bit rougher landing than she had expected, but you were there to catch her. And but we drove back to the assisted living area, and she was the queen, because she got to ride in a hot air balloon, and they didn't. So you know, it was a good feeling.
Well, these are all very good memories, and thank
Yeah.
you so much for taking time out of your day to share them with us and talk about your family and time spent on the old homestead. We really appreciate it.
It's our privilege, and thank you for coming to my home from that great institution called Oklahoma State University.